Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in this video I'm going to be walking you through the hardest bosses in Dragonflight Season 1, both from a tank's perspective and just kind of in general, discussing how we actually handle them in higher keys and what you can do to make sure that you defeat them, especially on those tyrannical weeks. I won't be covering all the bosses here, that would just be way too long, so if I don't cover a boss that you're interested in, make sure you leave a comment down below and I'll give you a brief rundown. Otherwise, let's just get started here with a boss that I constantly get questions about how to live through, the third boss in Temple of the Jade Serpent, Liu Flameheart. This boss here is all about your cooldown management, specifically in that Jade phase from 70% to 30% health as you're taking that nasty magic hit, along with its dot and healing absorb. The biggest thing to remember here is to never overlap your major defensive cooldowns, as that can result in you dying to another tank buster just further down the line. Manage your cooldowns well, and this fight feels way easier than it did before. Something to note here, in that Jade phase, the tank busters are 16 seconds apart, so you can use that to kind of plan out your CDs. For example, as a prot warrior here, that means every other hit I can use both Impending Victory, kind of eat into that healing absorb, as well as Spell Reflect to help mitigate that initial hit, as well as part of the dot, since those are both 25 seconds and 20-second cooldowns respectively. Now those alone aren't going to be enough here, and as you see, here come the tank busters in the Jade phase, so let's walk you through how I handle each of them. First things first, you've got your Ignore Pain, which can just always be up, so make sure you have something like that up for every time. If you have an ability like that, you have things at your disposal like Healer External. So in this case, I have an Evoker, so we have a Time Dilation, and I've already told them to use Time Dilation on me for the first and fifth hit in this phase. Now, alongside that, I have my own personal defensive cooldowns, which for a warrior is something like Shield Wall, something like Last Stand, like Demo Shout. I also have the Aranog Absorb Trinket, which can be used, as well as just your Health Pot, which, like Impending Victory, can really eat into that healing absorb. So what I do here is, like I said, Time Dilation on the first and fifth, and alongside that Time Dilation, I'll be using that Impending Victory at the beginning. You can see I don't actually have Spell Reflect up because I used it at the end of the previous phase, which is fine. I'll just use Impending Victory with that Time Dilation, along with Demo Shout to get me through the very first one. The very second one is going to be Shield Wall, and I think you're actually going to see me dip a little bit low because I should have used a Health Pot along with that Shield Wall, so that's what I would have used there, Shield Wall plus Health Pot on this next one coming up. You can see how comfy this is, of course. This one gets a little bit close because I don't Health Pot, but no, you probably should for this one. As an example, the Shield Wall for the initial hit as late as possible, so that it goes through as much of the dot as possible. You can see the dot expires. I still have a Shield Wall up. Very good. The next one, Spell Reflect, Impending Victory is back, and I'll also use my Trinket, and I believe I also Spell Block just for this initial hit. Again, a late Spell Block. It only helps with the initial hit. It does not help with this dot, but if you cast it late enough, it'll last through this initial hit and the one after, because again, 20-second duration, 16 seconds between the casts. So I will still have Spell Block running for this one, also have Demo Shout going, and then I will Last Stand after getting hit to heal up a little bit and help eat into that healing absorb. Note the funny charge path thing there. Maybe don't charge back if you have the wave near you. Then for this last one, it's 5. So we've got Time Dilation. We've also got Spell Reflect and Impending Victory. And as you can see there, I'm casting that Impending Victory like right before leaving the actual circle itself. So like the cast goes off, I spend 1 GCD into the Impending Victory, and the circle would be coming out here. I can rewind maybe to have a better one. Here. Goes out, immediately start running away, get 1 global off, and I have so much time here to react to the waves, right? That's another thing I've heard questions about is how do you actually dodge the waves? And the key is just you spend 1 global on the boss, tops here, and usually that global is Impending Victory, right? So in this one, get hit, global on the Impending Victory, I'm immediately strafing out, have so much time to react to the wave here, right? So much time. And so that's how you would handle that, both cooldown timings and in terms of avoiding that center wave. Once you actually get through this phase into P3, so get that boss below 30% health, the Nightmare as a tank is over, and it's much easier to handle. Next up, let's talk about Umbrelskul, the last boss in Azure Vaults. First things first, the Dragon Strike cast, big magic hit, of course. You can Spell Reflect it, you can like AMS it, but it's important to note that even those classes, so warriors and DKs, won't be able to mitigate all of them. So whenever you are getting hit by one of this, big defensive cooldown. It is a very large magic hit with a magic dot that needs to be dispelled. It's the only thing really that's going to one-shot you that is completely unavoidable. So this is where you want to commit your defensive CDs. See there, for example, it came up and hit me before Spell Reflect was back off CD on a Tyrannical key. I'd probably be dead with no mitigation, so keep that in mind. When it comes to boss positioning here, this is the reason we've put the boss over on this wall. As you can see, all the crystals are spawning right here as opposed to all around the boss, and that's what tanking the boss on the edge of the room does, right? It basically cuts off like the 180-ish degrees or so of this wall from crystal spawns, but they're all clustered around this area, meaning they're more likely to spawn either close together, within cleave range, or just easier access for the DPS in general. And so that is the reason for ever tanking this boss on the edge here. These spawn at 75, 50, and 25% health. So for those thresholds is where you want to make sure that you're near the edge of the room. Sometimes you do need to move though, usually because of those vortexes that spawn randomly, and I believe this will happen at some point as well in this video. Still no real update on how they function in terms of aggro table. It definitely does appear to be healing based or something, just because it always seems to follow either the tank or the healer. But in terms of like actually how they function, I still, your guess is as good as mine. Unfortunately, you're gonna fast forward here. Here come the orbs. They're coming in now, and you're gonna see how you have to move soon. Here it is. So crystals spawned here. You can see these orbs are starting to take up my space. I'm gonna need to leave soon because eating even like a single tick, you can probably live the single tick, but the other ticks are gonna hurt. So I heroic leap out. And I am waiting basically here, letting my stacks drop, and I'm dragging the boss, as you can see, still along the edge of the wall, because the boss is above 25% HP here, which means that there is going to be another crystal spawn once the boss hits 25%, and so I want to still try and make sure that I'm cutting off the spawns on the one side of the boss here. There's another Dragon Strike, which I mitigated with Shield Wall, because it didn't have Spell Reflect up. But you see, I'm still moving along the side of the wall here, letting my stacks drop. I believe I used Avatar previously to drop stacks as well. So Avatar, things like Freedom, Tiger's Lust, that kind of thing, Death's Advance or whatever can help you with those stacks. You can pause, you can let your stacks drop here. There's the spawn. Unfortunately, this spot was open a little bit. We have a pretty unfortunate Hardened Crystal spawn up there. That's really what we're trying to avoid, by the way. Another tip here, you can see the Thundering is going off. Thundering does make you immune to the actual movement speed decrease. You can see, like, I'm still just running away with the Thundering. This is just tank life here. Like, you do not want to go back in there and try and help with those crystals as a tank here, because most of these are actually fixating me, as you can see. So I'm just kind of hanging out here, and this is not even uncommon, especially for like a longer tyrannical fight. You do still have to mitigate these dragon strikes even if you're out here, so be aware of that. But this is kind of what you have to do to make sure that you're not getting murdered by these orbs here, because they tick extremely hard, even on like a fort key. And see, I'm just holding until my heroic leap, that kind of thing. Save your movement. You know, let your stacks drop, that kind of thing, and just kite around the room. And at this point, I don't need to be on the edge of the room directly because there's no more spawns of those crystals. They only happen at 75, 50, and 25. So I have a little bit more freedom with where I'm moving. Otherwise, though, just get out of there. Don't get murdered by orbs and get this boss down. Then we've got Hyrja. The tank, there's two things to worry about here. First, of course, that big tank frontal Shield of Light. This is kind of like Umbrelskul's hit, the Dragon Strike. It's the only real dangerous thing for tanks on this boss fight. Do not slack. Make sure you're mitigating every single one of this, especially this one, because actually it's way harder in my opinion. And it's the only thing, so mitigate it for sure. As a tank, I also usually use the beam to shoot myself across the platform to the other side just to help switch sides quickly. That can be nice. Speaking of switching sides here, there is a really massive tip for tank players I'm going to go over here, which will make this fight way easier to heal through, which involves switching sides at the exact right moment at the beginning of the fight, which causes Hyrja to use her opposite ultimate on whatever side she's on. So if she's on the lightning side, she'll use the holy ultimate. If she's on the holy side, she'll use the lightning ultimate, which obviously means for the lightning storm, she has no stacks of the empowerment, so it does significantly less damage. Now, how this works, you're gonna see I'm gonna pull the boss over here to this little point, and I'm going to wait till 4 seconds. As soon as it goes off, I leap across to the other side and then pull her there. So basically, in slower motion, let's go. The goal here basically is that you need to kind of get her in motion at just over 4 seconds into the fight. So there's a timer down here. Goes to 4 seconds. That's when I leap over. So any speed boost here would work as well. You don't need to leap, of course. If you're like a DK or a paladin, doesn't have like a big gap closer, you just cheat over to the side a little bit. Don't move the boss because you don't want her getting double empowerments right away. And then you would just sprint over as soon as that happens. You might need to be a little bit earlier. And you see I back up far enough that she's going to walk here over to this point as well and lose her holy empowerment at the same time. Holy Empowerment goes off and Sanctify starts. And at this point, you've done it. You've fixed the fight now. No matter what you do in the timings, she's always going to alternate from here. So you don't need to do anything crazy for the other side. As you can, I'll put the speed back up. I'm just going to use the Shield of Light to get shot to the other side of the platform. We did, again, an inch forward and she starts getting the stacks again. That's what happens there. So try not to move her too much, but it's not a big deal. And we're over here, and she's now going to lose her lightning empowerment stacks by the time she actually casts Eye of the Storm, which drastically reduces your damage intake from that ability. So very, very useful tip for Hyrja here. As you can see, lightning ability on the holy side. All right, let's go to the next boss here, and we're going to talk about Ruby Life Pools, and I'm actually going to cover all 3 bosses here because, especially once you start getting into higher tyrannical keys, they're all pretty scary for tank players, starting with Melidrussa, the first boss, of course. Here, a big thing to note, that Frigid Shard cast she's spamming right there is 100% magical, and she casts that the entire fight. So physical mitigations aren't really going to help you out here on this boss fight. The highest tank damage point is going to come when these chill storms actually go out here, because again, sometimes you'll see she's going to continue to spam that Frigid Shard during these, as you can see there, and especially that you're taking that ticking damage, you're taking that explosion at the end here, and so you want to make sure that that's when your mitigation is rolling. For that one, for example, I had spell block rolling for that entire duration there. Very, very helpful, but you want something larger rolling during those chill storms. That's the big thing to remember. Positioning wise here for the whelps, you can see I'm going to move a little bit closer here, and they're going to have to run through me to get to everyone. We also AoE stun right away as soon as they come in, just to help with aggro. MD also goes out during the whelps there to help with aggro, and I just am using usually AoE abilities to try and get threat on all of them. Again, those stops can be really helpful, both to help mitigate the melee damage, to stop them from meleeing other people, and also to make sure you don't get too many stacks of this magic debuff. Obviously, you don't want to get to 10 there. Very, very bad. But otherwise, as you can see, there's a shield wall, for example, going through when I'm getting the storm cast, as well as just being spammed Frigid Shard, right? You want something large for those chill storms. That's the biggest thing to remember for this boss fight here. Outside of those chill storms, your damage intake is relatively consistent, so you just want kind of that drip of mitigation. No big overlaps, like think about Liu Flameheart, right, where you're stacking like all your abilities into those windows, because that's when you're taking the most damage. Unlike that, you're constantly taking a drip of damage, and then there's those chill storm moments where you're taking a bit more. You want to spread everything out a little bit. No big overlaps. Just get some good coverage. Other than that, as you can see, we're just rotating as a group around the room here. Makes life much easier, both for the whelp spawns, for the healer, just in general, so I recommend doing that. Now, moving upstairs, we have Kokia Blazehoof here. Another fight similar to Liu Flameheart with the Searing Blows, the hit and the dots that you need to manage. However, this is a little easier. There's no healing absorb, the dot's much shorter, and it happens every 32 seconds instead of 16 seconds, so half as much. So you're able to have your cooldown rotation be a little bit more simple, because you can rotate 1 minute CDs. Like, for example, here's the time dilate going out on this one for me, and I'll be able to shield wall the next one, and we can kind of rotate those. I am running like the full shield wall CDR town, so it gets pretty close to a minute there. But otherwise, it's much easier to do this rotation because it's twice as long. You also will have something like, as a Proud Warrior, Impending Victory and Demo Shout for every single one as well, just because you have that Demo Shout CDR, and you can pretty easily get it down with the 2 targets here for a large portion of the fight. So that's really, really nice as well. So just remember, use as many things as you can every single time, and then rotate everything else you do have, and really do take into account those healer externals as well if you can, especially for all these harder hitting tank fights, it can be really, really useful and make it easier for you to just live. Outside of that, you can see there's some positioning involved in this fight here as well. I think the biggest thing here, it's important to position the boss in such a way that DPS can cleave both the boss as well as the ad, while also having safer baits for boulders. You can see here the raid stacking there, so I'm bringing the boss here, the boulder goes out, and they can safely rotate around and still have uptime on both the ad and the boss here. Similarly, we're gonna all kill this boss, right? Keeping the boss here, kill the boss, or kill the ad rather, move out, try and bait the boulders to a decent spot over this way. As you can see, there we go, good boulder bait. And we'll come out, and you can kind of control like kind of where the next ad is going to spawn by where you drag the boss. So you don't want to waste too much space, so we drag him not too far from the previous puddle. And again, I'll pull the boss right up next to the firestorm, just to make it easier to get a boulder bait, and then everyone else can rotate to a spot here. And that's kind of how you would handle it. Just in general, repeat this over the course of the fight. Now, let's talk about Kyrakka and Erkhart here, the final boss. Another boss where it's more about positioning for the tank, I would say. Very heavy positioning boss. And again, you can kind of control where all the other DPSers stand by how you position the boss. So for here, we want to stay inside this box basically here. Maximize cleave on Kyrakka because you want to push this phase by getting Kyrakka to below 50%. For the tank buster itself, it's really not too scary. Storm sounds like a mixed nature and physical hit. It only really gets scary if your healer forgets to dispel you like 2 or 3 times. So not really dangerous in there. So I would actually save your mitigations for if you ever get that flame spit you saw right there. It deals a pretty significant amount of damage. Still, even for a tank player. So that's definitely the more scary moment, especially at the beginning of P2 when multiple players are getting flame spit. You as a tank can relieve a lot of the pressure on your healer if you CD that in phase 2. But now, as you see, we're staying in this box the entire time, and that forces Kyrakka to land near us to get more cleave, essentially, because she will always land near other players. So if you have a player way out, obviously there's a chance Kyrakka spawns over on them. So we all stay in this box that forces her to jump down here, that lets us get a lot of cleave uptime on her. And as you're going to see here, we push her below 50% during this breath, so we get a lot of time to kind of get free damage on the boss there. And that's like the biggest tip here. More of a big positioning fight. And then after this in phase 2, you're free to leave the box, of course, because Kyrakka's down the whole time, and you just want to focus on kind of dropping your fire spits around the edges of the room here, just so it's out of the way and you can easily get away. So you rally here right at the beginning of this phase just to help with the damage, because it's very, very large at the beginning of that phase with the triple flame spit, with like an interrupting cloud burst as well. See the overlaps coming up. So that's what we do there. Otherwise, if you're able to kill this dragon, the boss fight just becomes significantly easier. From there, let's move on to the no-Cood offensive, where I want to talk about both Tempest and the last boss, but let's start with the Tempest here. The biggest thing is to make sure you're never caught out of melee range. That wind burst, pretty scary for sure, especially if it's ever overlapping with like the lightning strikes, for example. So there I did spell reflected, spell reflectable, but of course, if you're ever caught without a spell reflect up, or if you're just not a tank that has spell reflect, you don't want to be out of melee range. And for those lightning strikes as you saw there, you take the priority in being in melee. If melee DPS have to lose like a second of uptime, oh well. But if you step out and get one shot by the wind burst from the Raging Tempest, you're dead. You're wiping on the boss. That's not ideal, right? So you as a tank need to make sure, hey, I can't afford to take the extra damage right now. I am planting in melee. Maybe sometimes you can afford to take the extra damage, right? If I have spell reflect up, I will sometimes back out late and just spell reflect a single of the wind burst and then get back into the boss fight without taking a second wind burst. Or if you see you're taking a wind burst because you just take a step back too far, make sure you pop something, because that is a very scary ability. When it comes to soaking orbs here, you're going to see the tank is the lowest priority, right? Healer needs orbs to make sure everyone lives in the intermission. DPSers are doing the most damage, so they're going to get it for the damage. You see here, I'm letting the Demon Hunter take most of them. He is so generous. Lets me eat 2 orbs. Wow, what a nice guy. But usually, honestly, you probably wouldn't get those 2 orbs as a tank here. It's not uncommon to be at like 0 to 1 stacks as a tank here. I even get a 3rd orb. Wow, right at the end. Insane. But don't expect to get too many stacks in the initial set. It's at this point where the DPSers usually are trying to roll into their stacks. If they're able to roll their stacks here, they're going to be pretty close to the stack cap, and then you can start getting extra stacks at this point. But usually not too high. I'm going to probably just chill at 0 for a while here. Outside of that, the only other thing for it to be aware of is the Purge in your group. There's the lightning buff the Tempest will put on himself, which can be purged off. It got nerfed a fair bit early on in this season, so it's not super scary if you don't have a purge. It's not the end of the world. Just note this energy surge here. You will be taking some extra damage for the 8 seconds it's up if you don't have a purge available for your. So it does make your life a little bit easier there. Not the end of the world though. Now let's talk about Balakar Khan then. On that Balakar Khan. Okay, so we have Balakar Khan here. Actually, right on top, you can see we're actually pulling this boss without the mini bosses. As anyone with a combat drop can do that, or they can just die and you'll have to battle res them. They just kind of pull the dudes. You pull the boss at the same time, and then they drop combat, and you don't have the mini bosses attached to the boss, which is nice. We're using the rock here, pretty common strategy. He charges into the rock. The person who got speared is safe, or everyone is safe in the second phase. So it makes your life a little bit easier. Plus melee get good uptime because he immediately stops moving. We've got, I believe go behind there. Boss is going to charge. Really doesn't do much damage, especially to a big physical block tank. So kind of just chill there. And otherwise, the big thing you want to worry about is this bleed overlap coming up here with the upheaval. See, I use my trinket there to mitigate that, but this is actually the scariest point for tanks in this first phase, is when that bleed overlaps with the upheaval cast. You're taking a lot of ticking damage. You're taking a lot of, just in general, the ability for the healer to actually heal you is a little lower because they have to move usually, and so you just need to make sure that you have something up in this phase for those overlaps. In general, the bleed on its own isn't really a big deal. It's not too scary. It's just when it kind of overlaps with that upheaval is when you're actually feeling a little bit in danger there. See there, I'm going to pop shield wall for here because we're going to have the bleed into the upheaval. I think I also actually had the bleed cleanse, so it's not a big deal. And then we're going to move into the intermission. With our comp, we just do 2 and 2 for the intermission. We CC the far 2 Stormcasters and then kill the close 2 ones. Again, just rotating kind of kicks, stops, that kind of thing. I can fast forward a little bit there, show you guys. We basically just have these 2, those 2 are CC'd, kill these 2, then we move over. That lets us basically not need to lust this phase, and we can just lust the last phase for boss damage. Killing, moving to the next ads, fasting forward to the last phase. Go. And here the big thing is that conductive strike. Of course, you want to make sure your healer is dispelling you after this goes off if you're not like spell reflecting or AMSing it. Of course, we go back to the rock here, and the biggest thing to note here is we want to preserve this rock being a safe spot. Of course, the crackling upheaval in this phase will drop puddles on the ground here. So you're going to see, I believe we're going to move after the spear because he actually canceled the spear there. Rogue things. We want to make sure that we don't get any puddles from the crackling upheaval around our rock. So we're going to just kind of run away. What you can actually do here, which we didn't do, is you can actually, a little close there, you can actually pre-move the boss to like over here after that spear goes off. Especially if you're able to dodge the spear, and then you're just way safer. You're able to drop all of your puddles around this area. Otherwise, though, assuming you're getting dispelled, the tank damage in this phase is actually not too scary, especially compared to the first phase with the bleed. So that's one thing for tanks. It's more of a positioning thing at this point. Of course, getting gripped here, the stomps. And again, the raid cooldowns definitely would be for the crackling upheaval overlap. That's probably where I would have them put. Just makes them a little bit easier for everyone else to handle. And again, pre-moving for sure can be very, very helpful. Because now, as you can see, there's a ton of puddles here. Actually, the rock's still pretty usable, but it's a little spooky over there. You can see they're kind of trapped in that little area. So you can give yourself a lot more space than we did here. And that brings us to the final boss on the list, which may be one of, if not the hardest bosses for tanks in this season. Big Bird himself, Crawth. This fight has a lot of similarities to Liu Flameheart. There's the big tank buster, in this case it's Savage Peck. They're 16 seconds apart. They have a nasty 10-second dot associated with it. However, you have this ability for the entire boss fight instead of only for 40% of the boss's health, so your CD management needs to last through the entire fight here. Luckily, it's not as dangerous. It's a little less dangerous than the Liu Flameheart one because there's no healing absorb attached to it, so you don't need quite as much committed to it, but it still is quite dangerous. So as you see here, there's the time dilation, and it's all about not overlapping cooldowns. The other thing here, the bleed dispel, quite strong. I got bleed dispelled on the first one. I'm getting time dilated here. There was one in the middle too, which I'm missing. Ignore pain is up for every single one, making sure. I still have shield wall and the Aeronog trinket here to last me through the next one, and then we start with the rotation all over again. Of course, I'm also in D stance. You can't quite, you can see down here, I'm in D stance here as well to help mitigate that. Another thing to keep in mind is you are going to be taking increasing damage from this Deafening Screech, right? As it stacks up, you're taking that extra magic damage, and this can later on in the fight especially overlap with the actual Peck debuff as well. And so that's those really, really dangerous points where you want to make sure that you are, you do have some big mitigation rolling, especially for those Pecks. Because it is actually possible, just kind of like survive the Pecks, like for DK, for example, just, you know, couple death strikes and you're chilling. Warrior, if you build up ignore pain big enough and you ignore pain a couple times in there, you're kind of chilling as well. You don't necessarily need to commit a full CD to it, but for those overlaps, you definitely would want to make sure you're committing CDs. So keep that in mind. Orb usage here, we always go fire orb and then air orb. You usually will want to do it either on the fourth cast here after this fourth cast. Some people are crazy, they do a fifth cast with some big defense, so that's much more coordinated. I think for the most part, people will be fine with 4 here. Only higher tyrannical. And one thing to note, actually, we casted that pretty early. So let's rewind here a little bit here. So this fourth cast is going off. We use raid cooldowns usually on the third and personals on the fourth. Just keep that in mind. And this cast is going to go off here. Of course, this is the biggest Screech. But what you're going to see here is we insta-throw, but you have like 17 seconds because you only want to make sure you throw before this Screech cast goes off. So if you cast it when this is like 3 or 4 seconds left on it, it'll still come down and cancel the cast in time and clear your stacks. So we could have milked another like 10 to 15 seconds of this boss fight, which doesn't really matter for us on this key level, but it could matter in the end of the day. So keep that in mind. You can milk a little bit longer before you throw in that final goal there. Otherwise, you know, popping CDs, lusting, whatever on this damage amp here. And then we'll slowly make our way over to the air orbs over there. And again, we'll go at around 4 stacks usually. I think we might go a little bit earlier here just because we're going to kill. We don't need to deal with that 4 stack just to make the fight a little bit safer. But otherwise, we would be going with the whole raid cooldown on 3. So in this case, it would be rally. In last case, it was Zephyr. And then it would be personals again on the 4th one just to make sure everyone's living, and we would be using this gate on 4, but I think we usually are on 3. The other thing to note is like this air one is pretty annoying, so you don't really want to use it if you don't have to. That's why everyone goes fire first, because dodging the swirlies is much easier to do, but dodging the fire is a bit, or not fire, the tornadoes and the pushback wind is much more annoying. But there we have it, guys. My tank tips for the hardest bosses in Dragonflight Season 1. If you enjoyed it, if you found it useful, be sure to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it. If I missed a boss that you wanted to cover or have been struggling with, leave that down in the comments below. Let me know and I'll do my best to help you out. As always, I do want to give a big shout out to all of my supporters over on Patreon. It really does mean a lot. And if you want to be one of those supporters and get access to some cool Discord perks, things like coaching sessions and much more, I'll leave the link to that down in the description below. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.